A student, popular football player, evil child molester.
We find the defendant guilty.
I've never woken up in the morning and wondered, did we get the wrong guy?
This trial was a sham.
There's been an outcry.
He's a great guy.
He was absolutely guilty.
They got it wrong.
Initially, I was pretty convinced of his innocence. Now I wouldn't be surprised either way.
In your main event, Dustin Poirier defeats Dan Hooker via unanimous decision. 2 scores of 48-47, 148-46. But maybe that doesn't really tell you the reality. That is one of the best fights, certainly of this summer, arguably of the year. Round 2, one of the best rounds of MMA action I think I've ever seen. Now, we're going to get to where it falls or doesn't inside the fight of the year debate in just a moment, BC, but we'll start with you on this one. Let's talk about brass tacks here. Let's get down to them for just a second to start the conversation. Dustin Poirier gets a win. Never lost 2 in a row in 10 years inside Zuffa organization fights, so that's WEC and UFC. It's not exactly clear where he goes, though. He's still really at the top. Does he get a title shot, BC, with this win?
No, he will not, but it is not a fruitless pursuit, obviously. Not only is it a fantastic win, one of the better ones of this calendar year, and obviously you mentioned how great the fight was, right? We said coming in it could be the best fight of the summer. It was better than we thought it could be. This victory will be the equivalent of that, because there is still a little bit of a stoppage at the top of this division. And let me just say once again, said it before, I'll say it once more, this is the greatest division in the history of the UFC at any one time. I know the light heavyweight division about 10 years ago had so many Hall of Famers trade in that belt every few months, and it was great, and we loved them. But the quality across this top 10 is sickening. All-time great quality. The fights that we are seeing are just incredible mixes of technique and strategy with so much damn hunger and toughness. And what Poirier accomplished here was obviously holding serve. We said this was a quasi-crossroads fight coming in, right? If he lost 2 in a row to 2 of the best in the world, he wasn't going to go to the back of the pack, but it would take a longer time to get back up. He just held serve. He kept himself at the very top of this division. So what I mean when I say he'll get the equivalent of a title shot, you have to believe, Luke Thomas, if you are handicapping the matchmaking over the next year, that names like Tony Ferguson, Conor McGregor are most likely to be offered to him first. And obviously we know this, Luke, we know this one fact. It's true outside of COVID season, and it's double true right now. The best way to get a title shot in the UFC, stay healthy, stay willing, stay by the phone. You never know with travel, illness, and all that what's going to happen. Poirier is right on the outside looking in of either a backdoor title opportunity or at the very least the equivalent of a pay-per-view main event must-see fight.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is there's just too much uncertainty in the UFC generally with all of this COVID nonsense. As you pointed out, who's going to be able to travel, who might get injured, who might have any kind of reason to not take advantage of an opportunity that they ordinarily would. So that creates uncertainty. Plus, there's just a couple of names in front of them, and you don't know exactly where they are either. But all that tells you is until this general process is sorted, you can't move forward, which is to say Conor McGregor, Dana says he's retired. Conor says he's retired, but none of us really believe that he's actually retired. And I'm not saying he deserves to be slotted in front of Dustin, but that doesn't mean that he won't necessarily be. So he is part of this process, number one. Secondly, you have Tony Ferguson out there now. He took a bad beating at the hands of Justin Gaethje, but it would be foolish at this point to write him off. He still has, I think, probably a lot left in the tank. So what you're looking at here is if something happens to Justin, and Tony obviously wouldn't get that opportunity because he did lose to Justin, but there's kind of Conor floating out there. Maybe he could slot his way in, as you indicated, with an accidental title shot again against Nurmagomedov, but that was the last fight he had before this one, and he lost that one.
Luke. Like, they wouldn't put him back in with Khabib this quickly for a rematch, you're right. But you could stumble into an interim opportunity out of nowhere.
Possible, yes. It's possible he could do that. And again, he said that a lot of times guys get these interim titles and like, oh, it doesn't mean anything to me. It meant a lot to Dustin because he's never had an easy road to anywhere he's gone. He's had to really and truly earn it. And so if he got another opportunity, I don't think he would balk at that one either. I think he would go right after it. So fair enough. Fair point there. I'm saying to get to that undisputed title, the one that is no asterisk in front of it, no interim, no adjective in front of the noun, he is unlikely to be sort of next in the queue. But I think what's either going to happen is, one, if Conor wants to come back, I know he's probably saying to himself, why would I want to fight Dustin Poirier? I already beat the guy at 145. Now, you and I both know that was a long time ago. It was a different weight class. It was a different Conor. It was a different Dustin. Maybe Conor wins today, but it's at least in theory a very different fight. And then if Conor doesn't want that, I think the fight to make is going to be Tony Ferguson versus Dustin Poirier. I mean, that one has action written all over it. Now, you would have to give both guys some time to heal. They were really, really tough fights for the both of them, maybe a little bit more so for Tony. And Tony's obviously a little bit older at 37 years old, but that fight to me would be, I mean, if you couldn't get Tony versus Khabib after 5 tries, that's terrible. But if the consolation prize was you got Tony versus Justin, BC, and then you got Tony versus Dustin coming back of a redemptive win over Dan Hooker, I'm not saying that that's exactly 1-for-1. I am saying, man, if that's the door prize when you walk into the party, I'm not going to complain too much.
That's one of those fights that, like, you know, you always try to be careful not to enter the hyperbole zone, but, like, that's Gotti Ward-ish right there, only it's not two journeymen that we love. They just happen to be potential all-time greats with elite technique, yet they're willing, as Hooker and Poirier was, which is why we're going to transition in a second to the discussion of where that fight sort of ranks, when you are that willing to pour out the entire frickin' jug in the center of the cage for the opportunity in front of you. You get the potential. I mean, you just nailed it. I mean, Poirier and Ferguson, like, oh my God, my loins, Luke. Like, it's just ridiculous. But I want to interrupt this gross moment and ask you a legitimate question. Okay, if Poirier gets Conor, there may be an interim title. If he gets Tony, it's a big-ass fight. He won a lot. Did he also, Luke, true or false, kind of cement his all-time great status with this win? Tell me if I'm going too far here. The run Dustin Poirier had been on heading into that Khabib fight, right? And the way he turned his personal life and career and mental game and charity work and, you know, just the transformation of the man was so impressive. And when you look at that run, it's like, good Lord, he stopped Eddie Alvarez, stopped Justin Gaethje, you know, beat Max Holloway in a fight that would have been a fight of the year any other year. It's not that Dan Hooker's better than all those guys, but when you add Dan Hooker to the list and you do it at a time where Poirier was potentially at that crossroads moment, hip surgery, 10-month layoff, one-sided loss in the biggest fight of his career, this wasn't just, you know, same old G, you all must have forgot type of moment right there. It may have been like with the heart he showed, with the technique, I mean, with the full package. I mean, it was an insanely impressive performance from Poirier on Saturday night. I'm kind of thinking this happens every once in a while where it's that one fight that grabs you and says, you know what, we are watching right now one of the best to ever do it.
I mean, imagine how talented you have to be Dustin Poirier. And when I say talent, I mean talent in all the ways you're describing, which is a certain grit, a certain mentality, a level of polished technique. You know, I went back and I watched Dustin Poirier's UFC debut against Pablo Garza. To watch his evolution from there to then, from there to now it's shocking. Like, he was obviously very good back then, and now he is so much better. It's unbelievable. To be that kind of a person in virtually any other UFC weight class, you're going to be an undisputed champion at some point, and you might be it for a while. I think we need to start wrapping our head around the fact that there are going to be cases, whether if it's somebody like a John Jones at the top who sort of obscures how good some of his other contemporaries might be because they can't beat him, but they're still really talented, or when you get a division like the UFC's lightweight division is now, which is Dustin did hold a title, and it was an interim title, and I think that matters, but he's never been an undisputed weight class champion yet. That may change. We'll see. But the point I want to raise here is if someone is operating at that level, but inside of that kind of a weight class, you need to grade on a curve a little bit. There has to be a place inside discussions of who are some of, not of our favorite fighters, and I'm not saying the very, very best of all time, but what he's doing is so clearly worthy of not merely examination, BC, but praise, real, genuine praise. If he was doing this at that level in virtually any other weight class, I have no doubt in my mind at some point he would have grabbed a UFC title. And because he is in this division, it is way, way harder to do. I think we need to take a moment and say, how do we measure greatness in MMA? Because if we don't have a place for Dustin Poirier to be a part of that conversation, we're just not doing it right.
Well said, Luke. Well said, indeed. And he, cemented his sort of pound for pound status at the moment. And I did want to double down on that one thing. Like, his story was so great heading into that Khabib fight because of the grit and the reinvention mentally of, where he was in the beginning of his career to where he is now. But if he didn't cement all-time great status, meaning, one of the best we've seen of this era, certainly as you teased there, he'd entered into one of our favorites. You can't, like, every time out now, you're going to have to, if you weren't already, beyond appointment viewing for this guy, because you're going to see everything he has inside of him, inside that cage, and you're also going to potentially see him in this battle for the title in the craziest division of all time. It's just insane, Luke. Pour 2 out for the lightweight division. Okay, I love them women's strawweights, and the bantamweights are hot too, but pour 2 out that every time you get a top 5 or 6 elite lightweight fight, it's the best fight you could see all year.
Okay, so very quickly, because Jay is cracking the whip. What is your clubhouse leader now for fight of the year? Is it Poirier versus Hooker, or is it Zhang Weili and then Joanna Champion? What do you think?
I was there in the front row, as you know, March 7th, Las Vegas. I saw what those women were willing to do. I cannot put this fight on Saturday night, as great as it friggin' was. It's 1B in my fight of the year rankings. I think Dana said it a few times this calendar year. Every time there's a good fight and it's fight of the year worthy in the post presser, he's like, man, they picked the wrong year, right? It's the men's fight of the year up to this point, Luke. Look, that was a title fight. The women's fight, it was 5 rounds of frickin' fury. There were no breaks, no rest points, and the fight was really up for grabs as you headed into the scorecards. I think that's what this fight lacked to a certain degree. And although this fight had hellacious rounds, right? 1 and 2, as you mentioned, and 2 specifically is your round of the year. I mean, that's one of the best rounds I've ever seen in the history of the sport. But you had some different types of ebbs and flows in rounds 3, 4, and 5. Not worse, just a little bit different, right? A lot of submission heavy grappling. So, there wasn't as many switches in momentum, I thought, as there was in that women's fight, where it was just a track meet, a savage freaking track meet for 25 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to say I think the women's fight is probably the best fight this year. I will say round 2 of Poirier versus Hooker is my round of the year. The only reason I can't put the Hooker and Poirier fight on par with the women's, I thought in the 5th round of their fight, it kind of fell off a little bit. Not that it was bad. It just didn't have the same level of intensity. Whereas Zhang and Joanna Jędrzejczyk, it went down to the absolute last second with fists of fury all the way through. They really were just never taking their foot off the gas. So for that reason, I'll give it to them.
Let me say one more thing, though. Out the jug. Hot Joanna was willing to become an alien to try to win back that title. Luke, okay,
got quite literally disfigured in the pursuit of a belt, and I thought she won that fight too. The last thing I'll say is Dan Hooker, in close succession, has had 2 fights now, 10 rounds, 2 5-rounders, where they have been brutal fights. Yes. I would really like to see him take some time off, heal, not come back too quick. He's obviously quite talented. But Jesus, man, that is a lot of damage in close success or close time frame.
There's a part of his style that he's almost too brave and courageous for his own good. He knows too well what he's made of and his chin and his toughness. And as you saw in that fight, he was dragging Poirier into the deep waters, yet it was Poirier, the more experienced man, who was able to be the last man standing. So tough break for Hooker, because he's of that ilk, Luke. I mean, you saw the first 2 rounds. He is of that championship ilk. Hopefully he can find a way to sort of take a step off the gas just a bit and maybe learn a little bit more from Volkanovski, right? Who does the city kickboxing chess game a little bit more than Hooker's willing to.
A student, popular football player, evil child molester.
We find the defendant guilty.
I've never woken up in the morning and wondered, did we get the wrong guy?
This trial was a sham.
There's been an outcry.
He's a great guy.
He was absolutely guilty.
They got it wrong.
Initially, I was pretty convinced of his innocence. Now I wouldn't be surprised either way.